Eventually, one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to get it set up so that this I can do it right now. Well, I'm not going to get into the technical details, but so that whoever's watching the stream, I can throw the slide or the screen up as well too. I can swap back and forth. It's just inconvenient right now because I have to go into the thing, choose a different frame. It doesn't work very well. But after some of our technological upgrades are implemented, that'll be one of my priorities.
Jesse, I was listening to the rest of last week's.
Yeah.
There was some long discussion, or at least people spoke at length, and couldn't hear any of that.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that's going to be coming as well, as we're actually going to get some choir mics that are going to drop down here. So I might even forgo this because the choir mics will pick up everything. So in that course with everything, there'll be some tweaking that'll happen in terms of sound, the stream quality. But the intent is that whoever is watching the stream will be able to hear the whole conversation very easily. Yeah. So, but yeah, and I've gotten similar feedback. Like Shirley tells me that she can hear me really well, but can't hear anybody else. And we just I don't have the hardware for it. I set this up as kind of a
buffer.
A buffer, yeah.
I can't hear half of them anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the things that I'll be able to do, and again, I'll have to fiddle with it a little bit, is the choir mics will be running through the soundboard. So theoretically, I could also get it so that, there might be some feedback issues, so that, we could route that through the speakers so you could hear better in here, but we'll see. We'll see about that.
When did they start?
They told me 3 to 4 weeks a week ago.
Oh,
so
okay.
Before Easter was my kind of needs to be done by then. So, but they haven't gotten with me about scheduling yet. Couple of things before we get into this. So last week in the sermon, I briefly talked about some stuff going on with Lutheran Community Services. I mentioned it in the sermon, that they had
They're having issues.
Well, no. Well, yes, but no. Matt and I sat in on a meeting this week with the CEO and directors of Lutheran Community Services Northwest. How many of you know about LCS, LSS, and its various expressions? So if you're not familiar, there are versions of Lutheran Community Services in every state in the United States. They go by different names. So like in Minnesota, it's Lutheran Social Services. That was how I knew it. I think it was the same in Michigan too. But they are a pan-Lutheran organization, meaning that they originated kind of out of the collective of Lutheran denominations. So they're funded and supported both by the ELCA and the LCMS. So I've gotten the opportunity, they have, although I haven't gotten an invite in a long time, they hold a fundraiser pretty much every year, and I've gone to their fundraiser several times, and it's a mix of both LCMS and ELCA, which I think is pretty cool. And one of the neat things about it is that from a religious Christian perspective, our two denominations, ELCA and LCMS, realistically in 2025 have more differences than we have similarities, at least in terms of how our theology plays out and even in our polity. So it's always been really encouraging to me that things like Lutheran Community Services are an expression of our shared priorities. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So here are, LCMS relative to ELCA is a much more conservative, politically and theologically, denomination. And yet we come together to do the work, and what LCS Northwest does a lot of is refugee resettlement. That has been a priority. And of course this comes out of our history, which is that the majority of Lutherans themselves were immigrants or refugees at some point in time. I mean, if you point to the origins of Lutheranism in America, it is waves of immigration, right? Mm-hmm. German and Hungarians. I am the child of both German Lutherans, Hungarian Lutherans, and Norwegian Lutherans, where I grew up. I'm telling you where I come from. Swedes, Finns, the whole 9 yards, right? And many more, right? Eastern Europe has a large Lutheran presence in Poland, Czechoslovakia, etc. Yeah. But I grew up in a town that was founded by a wave of Lutheran immigrants that came across in the late 19th century, right? So we're all children of immigrants, so it's not a surprise then that we would be involved, both parts, LCMS and the ELCA, involved in that work, which is making sure that people who have legally been pre-approved for immigration are resettled in the United States in a way that they have the support that they need to be successful in our country. And what happened last Sunday, it was early in Sunday, because these people that tweet or whatever, X, apparently don't sleep at all. All they do is stay up all night on social media. Sometime early Sunday morning, retired General Michael Flynn, I don't know how he got access, well, I do know how he got access to, but I also can't believe that he had access to this information, posted a screenshot. And it was a screenshot of a bunch of numbers out of context, right? Basically, and then and he had put in the text of his tweet. Basically, look at these, and the quotes were in there, quote unquote Lutheran organizations involved in quote unquote money laundering, which is extremely frustrating from an academic perspective, because apparently he doesn't understand money laundering at all, because what he's effectively doing is accusing the U.S. government of money laundering through the Lutheran Church, which, again, it's just, if you just think about it for a second, is hilarious.
That's
okay?
a big wash machine.
Yeah, it's a big, well, he just, money laundering, okay, anyways. And it might not have been a big deal, but then Elon Musk, the head of the Department of Government Efficiency, unappointed, unelected, retweeted it, which effectively means that over 200 million people saw that. And all he said was, we're working to put an end to these illegal payments. Full stop. No context, no explanation, nothing, right? Well, and this is what really frustrates me. That was a 3 a.m. tweet that he probably thought nothing of before or after. What it effectively did was interrupt and functionally destroy the activities of so many different LSS, LCS, and different organizations in the U.S., okay? So Matt and I we sat in on a call with the head of LCS Northwest, which is a big region. It's not just Oregon. It's Oregon and Seattle, okay? And they essentially gave us kind of like the download on what's going on, how we can get involved, things that we can do to address it. And so I just wanted to, I spent more time than I planned on already, but I wanted to give you just the quick nuts and bolts of it so you understand. The biggest issue is not whether or not we're getting blown up on Twitter. That, believe it or not, that really has I mean, I do not like the idea of how do I put this? The thing that makes me anxious about that is that there are people that have shot up places for less, right? Over the idea of conspiracy theories and stuff like this. This is drawing undue negative attention, not just to LCS but Lutheranism in general, right? In which we can't participate in the conversation. We're not going to get into a Twitter fight with Elon Musk, okay? That aside, the biggest problem is that the Department of Government official, whatever, I hate that name, Dodge, trademark, that's the name of the card, Doge, they stopped all payments about 2 weeks ago, okay? And it's illegal. I mean, and this is not partisan, this is not politics, it's illegal because those are not grants, they're not money that the government is just giving to us, they are government contracts that were signed by the previous administration. So if they decide they're not going to pay those contracts, then it's our task then to sue for breach of contract, right? It's illegal, straight up. You can't just not pay a contract. And if the government stops paying its contracts, we've got bigger problems, right? Now we're talking about defaulting on loans. Now we're talking about, the economic credit rating of the United States of America. There are so many cascading problems if we decide we're just going to stop paying people. Those are government contracts, signed, sealed, and delivered, okay? Now, One of the things that LCS Northwest said is that they are currently participating in a lawsuit to make sure that those monies are restored and that those contracts are paid, but the timeline for that is open-ended, okay? Here's the practical effects of this, okay? Is that there are people who came into the United States in the last 90 days before the change in administration who suddenly have been cut off from all of the funding that they were promised. So there are people who have been settled here, who were in refugee camps for a decade, who made the trip across here, have been settled in various states throughout the U.S. with money and support that was committed to them, right? So this is language training, this is housing, this is job training, this is all the things that we have done efficiently. I mean, talking about government efficiently. This is all the things that that Lutheran Community Services and its various, versions have done efficiently for time immemorial, and all of the money just got cut off. One of the great things about LCS Northwest is that they have diversified their funding streams, so they can keep their employees and they can continue to support the families that have been resettled here for a finite time period. If they don't get paid, they're going to run into issues, but for the time being, they can do the work that they promised to do. There are many organizations throughout the U.S. that do not have that value. And it's not just Lutheran organizations. One of the co-signatories in the lawsuit is a Jewish organization that does resettlement in Florida. They have zero money, okay? Zero money. Here's the other big issue, is that there are families who have sold possessions, because when you resettle into the United States, you can bring 2 suitcases. They have sold homes, cars, they have divested themselves of everything except 2 suitcases on the promise that they were going to be resettled in the U.S. They had bought plane tickets, and they are now left with nothing. They're left with nothing, and no hope that we're going to be able to bring them across. And they are often in refugee camps and or in places where they fear for their well-being, which is the reason that they're resettling in the first place, okay? Is there hope? We don't know.
There's always hope.
Well, I read in the newspaper just the other day that a judge put an end to that, so they can't do that anymore. And then I remember in this congregation, we supported 2 families from overseas. I don't know the nationality, Korean or Vietnamese or what they were, and we were the sole support family.
Yep.
The apartment and the furniture and
Yep.
jobs and all that. We did that twice, met them at the airport, the whole thing. And then for Lutheran Community Services, once or twice, several of us, thank you, and went to their office and filed order for the postman all the information that we would send out to the public so they would know. And then we have big dinners downtown.
Yep.
Hotel.
And I would say, too, this is why I think we need to know about this, is because this is part of our ministry. It has been. I mean, we just helped fund a family this year, right? This was part of our Christmas work. Thank you, Linda, for making sure that we do that every year. This is part of what we do, right, when we talk about our ministry. One of the issues is, yes, a federal judge did rule, telling the government that they needed to pay their contracts. They couldn't just cut off. But nothing has happened, because essentially the federal government is still refusing to pay. They're going to up it to the Supreme Court, and I don't know anything. It's likely that the Supreme Court will rule in the favor of the plaintiffs, because if the government doesn't pay its contracts, then we've got bigger issues, right? But the issue is time, right? And so for the families that have sold everything, that are in this limbo space, we don't even have access, because what was the name of the global Global Rescue, which is the largest refugee resettlement. They work over there, right? LCS Northwest works here. Global Refuge is the glue that makes this whole process happen. They have essentially been told by the U.S. government, they've been cut off completely. And they have zero, they are completely on contract work. They have zero other funds. So they actually chose not to participate in the lawsuit because they're hopeful if they don't participate in the lawsuit that they can negotiate to get money, like if they go kiss the ring, I guess.
Yeah.
Sorry, and that's biased language, but so, and again, I don't. I obviously have some emotions about this. It was a very, very tough meeting for me to sit through because it's just. And David Dewey, who's the head of LCS Northwest, his thing is like, this isn't what we do. And not just we, but we, the bigger we, right? Give me your poor, your tired. What happened to that,
Yeah.
But it's also, it's just, these are people. And by and large, these are poor people. And the only people that are getting hurt are poor people. We're not actually saving the government any money. This is money that's already been budgeted and committed. We're not saving any money. So there's zero reason for this other than to accelerate human suffering as far as I can tell.
You give money to people who live on it, you can't take it back.
And that's it too. Susan, go ahead.
A lot of people may not be aware of how long the vetting process is for someone to be approved.
Well, that's what I was saying. Many of these families have been in refugee camps for decades. And they're also, and here's the irony of it, or tragedy, is that the people that, so I can't remember what day hour the stop payment came in. There were people who were ready to board planes whose tickets were nullified. They are already considered residents of the United States of America. Okay? Their paperwork has already been processed. They're already residents with paperwork, but they can't get into the U.S. because they can't get a plane ticket.
One of my interpreters, the last time I was in Uganda with medical teams, in a refugee settlement, it had taken between 6 months and a year
Yeah.
for him and his little family to be approved. And that approval came in while I was there. We were all good. And then I asked him, where are you? Well, he said he was going to Georgia. And my heart sunk. Because he is a non-native speaker of English who's black.
Yeah.
His family who went down in Georgia. Maybe I'm prejudiced about Georgia. Maybe I don't know.
Well, I want to, so let me give you a couple pieces of good news in and amongst this. Okay, first thing, and it's an asterisk in there as well too. The first thing is that in justification for the work that we do, one of the critiques of immigration and refugees in general has always been that they're a deficit to the U.S. economy. The refugees that have been resettled through Lutheran Services and Connected have actually been a debit to the U.S. government in terms of $123 billion. Credit, sorry. Debit card takes money out, but so does a credit card. Explain that. They have been a credit because in basically just in the amount of taxes they pay. Because this is where I praise the work that LCS and its affiliates do, is we are really effective at getting people integrated into our society and getting them connected with gainful employment. In fact, one of the higher ups in LCS Northwest is a refugee who has been resettled from Uganda, somewhere in Africa, and he's now like their CFO or something like that. He's a higher up. So this is somebody that he went to work for Intel, and then the dude, we're making sure that these people do the things that we claim to want immigrants to do, and we're really good at it, which is why the government gives us contracts. This is talk about government efficiency. So number one, be vocal in our support as individuals and congregations. And you can't combat Twitter. Let's just be realistic. The problem is once that stuff's out in the social sphere, whatever. But as congregations, we need to be vocal advocates in our local communities as well, in whatever ways that means, right? If you're talking to a friend and they're talking about those crazy Lutherans, you feel free to regurgitate this information. The other is financial support, which we already do, and I think it's something we should talk about as a congregation. Is do we potentially want to redirect some of our support towards something like LCS Northwest? We went through this as a council this fall. We have a number of different worthy recipients of our congregational donations every year. This might be a time when we want to redirect some of those funds for something like this, but that's a congregational conversation. And the other thing is contact your state reps. Fill their voicemail up. And it feels, with everything, it feels like you're just one voice in a million, and you are. But when you understand your constituency as somebody who's actually doing their job as a representative in the U.S. government, and you see that you have 500 or 5,000 voicemails from Lutherans who are concerned about this, it should affect how you practice policy. Okay, and if it doesn't, right? If they don't listen to you, well, then you've got a pretty good justification for campaigning against them, their re-election campaign.
Well, another problem with the federal government is it hasn't had its book checked since 1946.
And this is
And my dad worked his whole life for the federal government, and he said always, you give them $10 and they give you 7 back.
Yeah.
You know?
And this is, and unfortunately, this is one of the justifications for what Elon Musk and his 20-year-olds are doing. And this is the thing, too, is that from a political perspective, I'm not sure that the government doesn't need, like the federal government doesn't need some kind of oversight, And this is the issue. And this is what David Dewey said as well, too, is that, number one, these are contracts, right? These have already been committed. If you don't want to do the work of refugee resettlement, you don't. This is what they did in 2016, is they limited the number of refugees the allotment of refugees to be resettled by basically 100%. They were I can't remember the number, I can make up numbers, but they were resettling something like 40,000 refugees a year, and it went down to like 2,000, something like that. But that's how you do it, is you run it through the levels of government, and you, as a collective representing the United States of America, decide you don't want to do that. The executive branch can do that if they want to, but there's a process for that. You don't cut it off mid-process, right? We have committed to these people. The United States government has committed to these people. It's not LCS Northwest. We're doing the work. The government has committed to these refugees to resettle them, okay? You don't cut it off midstream, right? And this was his biggest issue. There is absolutely no reason. The money's already committed. It's already budgeted. It's not going to actually save the government any money. There is zero valid reason to do this beyond optics and spite.
Well, does it matter how far in debt we are?
No. No, I mean, functionally, no.
Bring up the debt.
Yeah.
With $35 trillion.
Yeah.
Now, China owns roughly $800 billion of that debt.
Yeah.
And so we have to service that debt with interest.
Yeah.
So we're sending China interest on an ongoing basis because they fund making their military better and all these other things. So,
Well, and this was his.
I think it needed to be done, but I don't think this is the right way to do it.
And this was Dewey's argument, right? And his argument, his pushback against it as well too, is that, I realize that you're talking about the bigger picture as well too, in terms of government oversight, which are important things. But in terms of refugee resettlement specifically, economically, it's been a net positive, insofar as that it does not contribute to the public deficit. It actually adds value to our economy. Resettling refugees through our processes, through LCS Northwest and other affiliated groups, is actually a net positive in terms of contribution to our economy. We get more from the taxes that these folks pay than what we pay in the process of resettling, which is to me seems like a valid justification. Okay. Even that being said, even if it were a net zero or a debit, the numbers we're talking about are extremely insignificant relative to something like the national deficit. I mean, a drop in the bucket. And I understand that it takes a lot of drops to make a bucket, but by and large, when we talk about what we do, right? And I'm kind of speaking for us as Milwaukie Lutheran. This is a conversation the council is going to be having tomorrow. We've got our council retreat where we talk about a lot of big topics. But we talk about what is our congregation interested in, right? What are the passions? What do we hear God calling us to do? And we can think about that in two ways. One is, what do we currently do, right? So, we have quilters, We have our Backpack Buddies program. We support a pantry at Rowell Middle School. We fund refugee families. These are things that we could articulate our values of our congregation. These are the ways in which we hear God calling us to do good in the world. This is what we do, right? I don't know why I'm making these hand gestures, but this is the work that we do. Okay, so on this kind of microcosmic scale, this is essentially saying these are the ideals of our congregation. We're talking about a similar thing on the national scale, right? What is the United States of America about? And one of the things that I as an individual, a child of immigrants some generations back, think is one of the things I think that the United States of America is about is, again, the promise that's on that you can read at Ellis Island, which is that we try to be a net benefit to the world in many different ways. And for me, at a personal level, this is what really hurts me. What really hurts me is it seems like those priorities have vastly shifted. Is that we have turned in on ourselves. It's all about what we get, and to be realistic, the United States of America, from an economic standpoint, have got it pretty good. Now, it doesn't mean that those economics are reflected throughout the U.S. population. I mean, when you talk about wealth being hoarded in the hands of a few, and not being represented in our poor, which I'm going to talk about in the sermon less politically, but then we've got a bit of an identity crisis, right? And sure, does our government need oversight? Is it inefficient? Yes. Every bureaucracy is. Yes. I mean, we can talk about the ways in which our church has spent money that we didn't need to spend. One of the ones which I'm just, and I don't want to throw shade on anybody, but we have been paying a Wi-Fi service several $100s per year for ongoing subscription costs. We just switched over to a new Wi-Fi service, and there are zero subscription costs, which makes me wonder what exactly we were paying this previous company to do, right? And a lot of that just comes out of ignorance, is that we didn't know any better when we set it up, right? Technology has also changed in 10 years, but those things can be amplified on multiple scales when we talk about something as vast as the United States government, right? Yeah, absolutely. It needs to run efficiently. We shouldn't waste taxpayer dollars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. On the other hand, this isn't a contrast. This is not a contrast. These two things can go hand in hand. On the other hand, I think we should do good things with the money that we do use, right? And it's not necessarily always charity. Again, I'll go back to what David Dewey said, which is that resettling refugees in the United States of America benefits the United States of America. We're all refugees. We're all immigrants. If you trace our genealogy back far enough, none of us came from here. None of us. If Corey were here, some others. But anyways, sorry, my rant has gone on too long. But
Well, since you opened the door about rural mission,
yes.
I'm going to put out a little advertisement. I have been wanting to get rural mission going at full
Yeah.
speed again. I can't do it by myself, and I have nobody to help me. I need help.
Yeah.
Please contact me if you want to help me with rural mission.
And one of the things too, I would add on to that, is that I think one of the rhythms of the congregation has been around the idea of committee, which is that you sign up for a tenure and you serve that tenure, and then if nobody else is there to replace you, you serve another. We're not necessarily doing that anymore. I mean, for council, yes, right? Our bylaws require it. But I don't want to put words in Linda's mouth, but I would say that if Linda's been doing it on her own, she would appreciate any help for however long you can commit.
Well, I think Greg was helping.
Yes.
And that's not available.
Yeah. So if you want to participate, talk to Linda. We have good work to do right now,
And
which
let's
is
talk about a commitment of putting in 20 hours a week.
no.
No. We're talking about just suggestions and how to implement.
Ideas of how we can support our friends at Lutheran Community Services Northwest would be really valuable right now. Okay, let's talk about Revelation. Sorry, that I should know better when I get myself off on a tangent, but and I did have a couple things to say about that. The last couple weeks I've been doing a lot of PowerPoints, which I think are wonderful, but one of the things that does is it kind of doesn't facilitate conversation a lot. So what we're going to do this week is we're going to start reading at chapter 4, and we're going to try to get through chapter 7. I suspect we won't get through that today. But then what we'll do is after we've read through it, then I'll kind of do maybe a short presentation on some of Kester's points about it. But first I want us to kind of, with the framing that I've already given you, I want us to talk about the text. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So today we're just going to read through it and talk about it. So, quick, the recap of 1 through 3 is it's the introduction where John is talking about what he's writing, why he's writing it, where he's getting the information from, and then he specifically addresses the 7 churches in Asia Minor. Last week we talked about kind of the different categories of pressures that those congregations were facing. If you remember, one was persecution, one was assimilation, and one was comfort, So churches that were experiencing persecution were actually, and mainly the kind of persecution that it's not necessarily, stormtroopers knocking down your door, but it's neighbors, it's the local government, the powers that be in your neighborhood that are treating you as a secondary human being or a secondary citizen. Those are the kinds of persecution pressures that they're facing. Assimilation really centered around who are we? And John has some very strong opinions on whether or not you can follow Jesus and eat food sacrificed to idols, for example, or food sacrificed to God. And one of the things that I would emphasize about that is there's a lot of cultural context to that, and this is why it's helpful to kind of look at those different cities that are involved. There's a lot of cultural context in terms of one of the cities that was mentioned, they have they have a big temple to Artemis, and so one of the things that the community does is they hold a feast, and at that feast they sacrifice a lamb to Artemis, and it's a question of, can I eat that lamb with my neighbors? And those are the kinds of assimilation pressures that John is addressing. And then finally, there's the question of comfort, which is that they're not experiencing persecution. They're not really struggling with identity, but things are going pretty great. And one of the arguments that John makes is when things are pretty great, you're not necessarily being involved in the work that Jesus would have you be doing. So now we get to the actual message. Those first 3 chapters were the introduction, the preface. Now we get to the vision that John was given, which he is now conveying to those 7 churches. So we're at the beginning of chapter 4. After this, I looked, and there in heaven a door stood open. And by the way, I'm going to read through this probably in 6 to 7 verses at a time, basically how it's split up in paragraphs. Feel free to, I'm going to pause at the end of each section, but also feel free, if you're like, hey, that verse said something to me, raise your hand. I'm happy to stop reading. After this, I looked, there in heaven a door stood open, and the first voice, which I had heard speaking to me like a trumpet, said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." At once I was in the Spirit, and there in heaven stood a throne with one seated on the throne. And the one seated there looks like jasper and cornelian, and around the throne is a rainbow that looks like an emerald. And around the throne are 24 thrones, and seated on the thrones are 24 elders dressed in white robes with golden crowns on their heads. Coming from the throne are flashes of lightning and rumblings and peals of thunder, and in front of the throne burn 7 flaming torches, which are the 7 spirits of God, and in front of the throne there is something like a sea of glass, like crystal. Does anybody recognize some of this language for hymnody that we recently sang? Casting down their golden crowns around the glassy sea. Holy, 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 Lord. Anyways, sorry. Yeah. And the interesting thing is that is holy, holy, holy pulls from Ezekiel as well too. It pulls imagery from Ezekiel, but also from Revelation. And go ahead, Linda. Hey, I don't know, Linda. And I'm not being snarky. I guess I am a little bit. But this is the thing, is what does it mean? What does it mean? So again, Craig Kester, he makes the point that the intent is not necessarily that there is some secret which that represents, but that these images the imagery that he's describing conveys different things. It might make political points in this context. It might affect you emotionally. So I guess what I'm saying is, what do you see in that? How does that image? You see a tree, and maybe because you know what color these gemstones are. So what color are jasper and cornelian? Does anybody know? That's what I thought. Emerald is green. I think cornelian is red. Is that right? Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe a gem-like tree with red apples on it. I don't know. And again, one of 8. Roy G. Biv, right? that would be 7. But I remember it's like ultraviolet is one of the colors that is on the spectrum that we don't see very well. Anyways, I did at some point. So, okay, and several things. So again, 7 as a number is significant. It means wholeness, which is, one of the things that Kester speaks about. Why does John write to 7 churches? Is it about those 7 specific churches, or is it metaphorical for John is writing to all of Christendom? The other thing is that it's in chapter 3, I think, John refers to the 7 angels that represent each church. I don't know if these spirits and these angels are the same thing, but I think there's definitely something behind the fact that there are 7 spirits and 7 churches. So maybe it's about communication. Notice that John says, once I was in the Spirit. This is a concept that's going to come up a lot throughout Revelation, as John is essentially saying that it's not me, it's the Spirit in me that is helping to speak these things, okay, which I think we understand the concept of the Holy Spirit and inspiration. Obviously John is using that in a unique way. But one of the things too is that, again, think about this. What does it mean? Also, take the time to just imagine what it looks like. I mean, it's really a striking image. Around the throne is a rainbow that looks like emerald. Well, which is it, John? Right? Emerald is green. Are there different colors of emeralds? I don't think so. I don't know. An emerald is green, but there's a rainbow that looks like an emerald. But keep in mind, one of the pieces that Kester pointed out as well, too, is that John is trying to describe something, and he's having a hard time of it. And he's trying to describe a divine image in human terms, which is why you see a lot of, it's like this, but it's also like this. One of the stories I'm always reminded of is when Jesus heals the blind man, and he asks him what he sees, and he says, I see trees walking. Anybody remember that story? I think it's in Matthew, which is such a visceral story for me, because I can just imagine somebody regaining their sight and trying to discern as their eyes are becoming unclouded. Anybody ever see somebody who has like I'm pointing at my neck, the cochlear implant installed, and they start hearing for the first time? Is anybody actually, there's some great videos out there that give you the sense of what it's like to hear through a cochlear implant. It's not like hearing like we experience it. It's a very different experience. But that's what I imagine John is like, it's like this, but it's also like this. It's hard to describe, Hey, score 1 for my random knowledge. I'm pretty okay at trivia. Yeah, tree and a rock. And pay attention to that throne. Who from our perspective would be seated on that throne at the center? This is a Sunday school answer, folks. I'm not getting super complicated. Who's at the center? Who's on the throne? God. Yeah, okay. So John is perhaps describing his vision of God. Pay attention to that throne at the center. We're going to get repeated descriptions of who's actually sitting on that throne. The other thing is 24 elders. Why 24? 2 times 12? I don't know. And that might be as complex as it is, 3 times 3 times 4. 2 times 3 times 4. Oh yeah, which would be, is there a term for that? Yeah, it would be part of a factorial. This, by the way, next week when I do the slideshow, I'll try to get images of some of the Albrecht Dürer woodcuts. This woodcut is fantastic. Again, it doesn't have color in it, which is the unfortunate thing, but it's got the lightning bolts shooting out from the throne. It's pretty cool.
Why do the numbers have to be important at all? It's just kind of an image of
That's a really good question.
Rome.
That's a really good question. I'll give my opinion. Is I think John is describing something that it's hard to understand, hard to experience. And maybe this is what he's seeing. I would find it strange that as he's seeing this vision, he's going 1, 2, 3, 4. Do you get me?
Yeah.
But that number has significance to him, and he thinks that number is going to have significance to others. That it's going to communicate something about what he's seeing. And again, we're talking about 7 being wholeness, the 12 tribes of Israel, right? I mean, so you got 24 elders, you've got 144,000 of the witness. Beyond this is that it's tying this concept of completeness and wholeness into the history of the people of Israel. It has meaning. Doesn't necessarily mean it has a secret meaning, if that makes sense. Is it okay if I go on? Mm-hmm. Okay. Around the throne and on each side of the throne are 4 living creatures, full of eyes in front and behind. The first living creature, again, like a lion. The second living creature, like an ox. The third living creature with a face like a human face. And the fourth living creature like a flying eagle. And the 4 living creatures, each of them with 6 wings, are full of eyes all around and inside, day and night. Without ceasing, they sing, Holy, 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 the Lord God, the Almighty, who was, and is to come. Okay, let's pause there. Okay, what are the 4 creatures? There's no answer, right? There's no answer. We're not saying answers today. We're talking about what we think, which I guess is an answer, sort of. But. Oh, I love that. Yeah, it incorporates a sense of time to it, seeing what's in front and what has gone, and also it's full eyes on the inside, what is happening now. What do we think of, just the word creatures, what does that make us think of? Creation, yeah. Animals, right? Oh, sorry. And notice too, you have an ox, a human, an eagle, and a lion. Okay? A bird of the air, a predator, a carnivore, an omnivore, and us. It's really interesting if you contrast this imagery with like Genesis, the end of Genesis 1 into Genesis 2, where Adam, the earth creature is naming these creatures as they go by, and how there's the birds, or there's the beasts of the air and the beasts of the field, and the beasts of the sea. Yeah, I don't know. Like one of the propositions is that this is a metaphor for creation, is that you have God at the center and the created order, that first ring, it's creation. I don't know. It's a cool image though, isn't it? It's very trippy. Any other thoughts?
Why would they need eyes on the inside?
Yeah, that's a good question. Self-knowledge, I don't know. Like Linda was saying, maybe it's a metaphor for time. They have eyes in the back, eyes in the front, eyes in the inside, so it's past, present, and future. I don't know. How is he able to see the eyes that they have on the inside? And again, this is the important part. When you read this, you've got 2 choices. Well, you got more than 2. You always got more than 2. But you can look at this and say, well, what is the meaning? In other words, what is the secret knowledge that John is trying to convince us of that apparently these folks knew? Which, again, Kester would say, no, that's not the point. Or is this John trying to describe something that he can't describe, trying to convey things that are meaningful to him? Again, it's the big fish story, right? How many of you have tried to tell a story to somebody else and you hit the things that are meaningful to you, right?
This is from the Old Testament.
Yeah, well, absolutely. In fact, this is the beginning of the book of Ezekiel, right? That Christ, well, it's not Christ at that point, it's God. Ezekiel has this beautiful description of the long flowing robes of God, and Ezekiel's down here, and all he can see is the hem of God's robe, and he looks up and up and up and up, and it goes up, and then there's the 4 creatures on the corners of the altar that then levitates and flies out of Jerusalem to the east towards Babylon, which we went through Ezekiel a couple years ago. It's very, very cool. But yeah, and this is the other thing. Is this John making a connection between, to the Old Testament? Yes. All of the above, yes. Because we pull from the things that we're familiar with as well too. Like when you describe something to somebody else that you haven't seen before, we tend to use metaphors or similes. It was like that. Is it a bird? Is it a plane? No, it's Superman. And then, yet another line from Holy, 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 like the opening line. Yeah. This is where we get so much of our hymning from. Is it okay if I move on? Do you want to talk about this anymore? Okay. And whenever the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks to the one who is seated on the throne, who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall before the one who is seated on the throne and worship the one who lives forever and ever. They cast their crowns before the throne, singing, "You are worthy, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power. For you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created." So it kind of ties in that idea of this being a metaphor for creation, the created order. What other stuff popped up in there? I tried not to put words in your mouth. What do you make of them casting down their crowns? Yeah. Isn't that interesting? So who might the 24 elders represent?
Well, that's the sign of completeness.
It's a sign of completeness. Might this represent earthly authorities? 24 elders? I don't know. But again, what John is communicating here is it's not necessarily we should have to go through and identify each of the 24 elders, but it's the metaphor of these authorities, whoever they are, whoever they represent, laying their crowns down at the feet of the divine. Is that something that we can get on board with? Is that an idea that resonates in Christianity? Do you think that was an idea that resonated with these churches in Asia Minor, many of whom were undergoing persecution? The idea that earthly powers would bow before the divine? Yeah. I'm pointing these things out because this is a great place to start in terms of like understanding the imagery, or not understanding, accessing the imagery, right? Is what is John trying to communicate here? But again, John is speaking the images that Christ gave to him, that the Holy Spirit is inspiring him to say. So at least what John is advocating for is that this isn't stuff that he's making up. This is the communication that he received from God, which he's conveying to others. All right, we okay to move on to 5? Okay. These chapters, believe it or not, go fairly quick. Depends. Okay. And again, keep track of the different concrete, like we have the seven torches, the 7 lampstands. Now we've got the scrolls. Then I saw on the right hand of the one, who's the one seated on the throne again? God, okay. A scroll written on the inside and on the back, sealed with 7 seals, and I saw a mighty angel proclaiming with a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and break its seals?" And no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or to look into it. And I began to weep bitterly because no one was found worthy to open the scroll or to look into it. Then one of the elders said to me, "Do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has conquered so that he can open the scroll and its 7 seals." Okay. The 7 seals are going to factor in heavily as we progress throughout the narrative here. Every time that one of the seals gets opened, there's a new vision that John receives. And this is where we get a lot of the apocalyptic stuff, the death and destruction. And by the way, again, we talk about the not so helpful translation of this. These are the things that people have pored over for centuries, trying to decipher what the 7 seals are. Not helpfully, but that's my opinion. What do you think? Again, there's no right answer here. What do you think the scroll might represent?
You mean what's written in it?
Or, yeah, exactly. And it's interesting, he describes there's writing on the inside and the outside.
Well, they used to do that on letters too. You
Sure.
write a letter and then a seal is locked on it.
Yeah.
Nobody else is tampered with it.
I just gave my wife a Valentine's Day card that had a seal on it. I bought it that morning.
Could be warnings and then, that idea of warnings and comfort.
Yeah, and again, don't let me put ideas into your head. I imagine that the scroll represents knowledge in some form. Again, what does writing entail? And again, writing has a very special place in the Hebrew concept. Writing was the gift of God to God's people that facilitated communication. I don't know if you remember, this was like 7 years ago. We did an introduction to the Hebrew language and how the introduction of vowel placeholders was seen as a divine gift because it facilitated communication in a new way. It gave more people access to writing, and it's not insignificant that Abram becomes Abraham with the addition of the hey, which represents the E sound. It was a placeholder, and Sarai becomes Sarah with that magical hey that goes in there as well too. I mean, again, it sounds like woo-woo stuff, but we're talking about what these ancient people understood to have meaning. What does a scroll represent? Well, what is the scroll that every Jewish person accesses every week? The Torah. Absolutely. The scroll might represent the revelation of knowledge. And the important question here is who is worthy to open it? And no one is except the Lion of Judah, okay?
And it goes back to the four, lion, ox, human, eagle.
But this is where it gets confusing.
Because lion represents to me power.
Sure.
So we then translate it into who has the power.
And this is where it gets super confusing. There's a question here, which is that, does that refer to the beast with a lion's face, or does it refer to somebody else? Okay? And again, there's no wrong answers here. Who might be the root of David? Who's David? King David. King David reigned over Israel during its most prosperous period. He had Solomon. Solomon had Rehoboam, who was a jerk. Who? Aha. So is perhaps the Lion of Judah being literally Judea, the tribe of Israel, is this Jesus? Maybe, potentially. Yeah. Go, Susan. Yes. And in fact, if you go to many Catholic cathedrals, on the four corners, so oftentimes there'll be the four virtues, which is temperance, blah, 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 I can never remember all four of them. And then if you're looking, I'm not going to describe this very well. Or you'll see the representations of the four gospel writers, and each of them has an attribution, which are those four animals as well too. Yes. So there are no right answers. And we ask the question, which is it? Is it a metaphor for creation? Is it a representation of the gospel writers? Yes. Yes. John is working on multiple levels here. This is the type of stuff that when you were a teenager and you got that new Jefferson Airplane album and you sat listening to White Rabbit, maybe I'm speaking to the wrong crowd here, right? Right? Trying to decipher the meaning of what Grace Slick's lyrics meant, or for me it was Kid A by Radiohead. Alice in Wonderland, exactly. It's super easy to decipher, but is she commenting on the society of whatever? I'm being a little bit snarky here, but yeah, there's no wrong, there's no right. What does John mean? Well, again, what is Christ communicating through John? Is this the gospel writers? Yes. Is this representation of creation? Yes. It's cool. I like it. Then I saw between the throne and the four living creatures and among the elders a lamb standing as if it had been slaughtered. Yeah, we'll come back to that. Having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. He went and took the scroll from the right hand of the one who is seated on the throne. And again, hanging modifiers. I'm guessing that he refers to the Lamb. He went and took the scroll from the right hand of the one who was seated on the throne. When he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell before the Lamb, each holding a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. They sing a new song. You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slaughtered, and by your blood you ransomed for God saints from every tribe and language and people and nation. You have made them to be a kingdom and priests serving our God, and they will reign on earth. So who is it? It's Jesus, apparently. Maybe. Probably. But notice the layering of the imagery here. So first it's the Lion of Judah, the root of David. Now it's the Lamb standing as if slain. That doesn't make any sense. Usually when you die, you fall down. but again, pause your incredulity for a second. 7 eyes and 7 horns. Whew, that's a creepy looking lamb. that's a nightmare lamb right there. And that lamb is the one that goes and takes the scroll, who apparently is worthy to open the scroll. Because he's the Son of God, ransomed the saints. And all of a sudden the saints are in here. So there's the golden bowls, in which are the prayers of the saints. This is one that I skipped over a lot of times, but what a cool image to me. This idea that our prayers rise as incense, and not only that, in the divine image are held and valued as a precious thing. I'm sorry, it's just... Yeah, I got my watch on. It's 10:31, not 10:34, which is what that one says. You have made them to be a kingdom and priests serving our God. They will reign on earth. Whew. That's interesting. That does not align with the present reality that these folks lived in. And again, is what John is writing, is this a critique of the powers that be during the time that John is writing this? Yes. And more. We'll come back to that, or we can come back to that. Then I looked and I heard the voice of many angels surrounding the throne and the living creatures and the elders. They numbered myriads of myriads and thousands of thousands, singing with full voice, "Worthy is the Lamb," and you'll hear this often as "worthy is the Lamb who was slain," instead of "worthy of the Lamb that was slaughtered," to receive power and wealth and wisdom and might and honor and glory and blessing. You can almost hear the rhythm, the poetry in those words. It is a hymn. You can pretty much take any line in Revelation, and it's a hymn. It is. It's because this, and rightly so, this imagery is so vibrant. It's this great songwriting. Then I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and in the sea and all that is in them singing, "To the one seated on the throne and to the Lamb be blessing and honor and glory and might forever and ever." And the 4 living creatures said, "Amen." And the elders fell down and worshiped. What's your emotional impression of this? As you witness this image? What did they grow on Patmos, man? Was there? Yeah, it was good stuff, whatever it was. Yeah, you can buy it down the street now. Yeah. I mean, if you're trying to access this from a rational perspective, it's going to be tough. Yes, yeah.
This actually
Yeah. They're the good aliens, not the Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind aliens. Talk about a traumatizing movie. Never watch that one. and again, I'm not necessarily trying to take us into woo-woo mumbo jumbo, but I mean, do your dreams affect you? I mean, either the ones that you have in your sleep or the ones that you hold down as a guiding image, you know? I rarely dream too. I was dreaming this morning, but I didn't remember it. One of those dreams, though, where I woke up and it took me a second to grasp reality, because it was close enough to reality that I don't remember. Ah, so it might be an externalization of internal conflict. Sorry, I'll set down my Dr. Freud hat for a second. I'm being a little bit snarky. Let me name a reality, which is that in our very rationalized world, modern world, we have explanations for everything. Again, we can thank people like Sigmund Freud and Immanuel Kant and others like that for plumbing the depths of the human psyche, and we can rationalize all of our irrational experiences. We try to, at least. In the ancient world, there was less of that. Okay, people didn't necessarily try to rationalize the irrational. They simply held that to be perhaps the divine or the supernatural. Okay, and I'm not advocating that we do the same thing. I'm helping us to understand somebody who comes out of that, right? John seems to be pretty confident that he can write a letter with some really profound imagery that comes across as somebody that has taken a lot of peyote from a modern perspective, but he is pretty confident that it's going to have meaning to the people that he's sending it to. So much meaning, in fact, that it ends up in our canon. And we have a hard time accessing it because our very rational way of seeing the world comes into conflict with it. But there's something in here that John sees as meaningful. Did I? Well, and that's the thing, right? Is that and this is one of the things that Kester pushes against, the idea that there's an embedded secret to unpack. Kester would argue that these aren't embedded secrets to unpack. John is simply communicating an experience that he thinks is going to be meaningful to everybody. So real quick, we'll end at chapter 6 today. Next week we'll start with chapter 7. What do you think John is communicating in this image? Let's look at the image real quick. Okay? Put on your visualization hats real quick. What's at the center? Yeah. Yes. Hold on to that. What's at the center? Describe it to me. Yes, it is God, but what's the image? The throne. The throne is at the center. Well, seated on the throne is one that looks like jasper and carnelian, and somewhere in there is a rainbow that resembles emerald. Okay. What's the next ring? What's around the throne? It's not Jesus yet. We'll get back to Jesus. Nope. 4 beasts. Sorry. There are wrong answers. It's the 4 beasts. What's around the ring of 4 beasts? The 24 elders. I'm not going to draw 24 circles. And then what is around that ring? And we're not quite there yet. Then I looked and I heard the voice of many angels. Surrounding the throne. And the living creatures and the elders, they numbered myriads of myriads and thousands. Can anybody do the math real quick? How many is that? Again, there's no fixed number here. What if somebody describes to you that they saw something and it looked like thousands and thousands? How many is that? More than you can count.
Right.
More than you can count. It is.
And maybe more than you can see.
Exactly, Pat. Again, because John is trying to convey what he can see, and he's saying, there were so many I couldn't even begin to count them. Right? It's like grains of sand on the seashore. Okay? And then here's one of the debates, because this gets a little clarified for a little bit. This gets clarified a little bit for us in chapter 7 and beyond. But is there a distinction between the angels and the myriads of myriads and the thousands of thousands? And the short answer kind of is yes. As we go on, the concentric circles are going to be the 144,000. And then around them are the multitudes. Okay, I didn't leave enough room for my whole circle on the board. Okay, and then between the beasts and the throne is that's the Lamb with 7 eyes and 7 horns, is Jesus. Okay. Speaking metaphorically, you kids are going to hate me. What is this? The universe. The universe as it's understood by John. And as he suspects it will be understood by the people that he's writing to. Okay? All of these things are things that have meaning for them. We're able to unpack the meaning, right? It's tougher for us, but we can come up with ideas of what the 4 beasts signify, what the 24 elders signify, what the angels signify, right? And we can talk about thousands upon thousands and myriads upon myriads is everything, right? It's everybody.
Yeah.
It's 8 billion or however many people there are on earth. And what are they all doing? They're bowing down, but they're all singing. They're all bowing down, they're all singing. Why do we sing? Joy, celebration, yeah, mourning, grief, all that too. But we're singing together, right? This is the powerful thing of this image is imagine all of creation united in voice, praising God. This is the image that John starts his letter with. This is the created order. This is the kingdom of God. Okay? This is not meant, again, 1041. This is not meant to be picked apart and analyzed and associated, right? Like, you can feel the emotion, right? When you visualize this idea that we're not fighting with each other, right? We're not belittling or dehumanizing. We're not destroying our planet. We're not exploiting the resources. We're not burning down our, all of the things that this narrative counters, which is the idea of all of creation united in harmonizing with God. Man, that's a gut punch, isn't it?
But you can see yourself
And
in
you
the
can-
circle.
Absolutely.
Because that's why the story is so
Absolutely.
important, that we stick with going to God.
And I would argue, yes, you can see yourself in the circle, and it doesn't matter where you are.
No.
This is not about establishing a hierarchy. This is about, going back to Cynthia, this is about completeness.
We're part of a big group.
We're part of a big group.
The family of God.
We're part of the huge family of God, which includes saints and angels bowing down. Saints and angels bow down before thee. Sorry, I can't help but fall into
And
hymnody.
lots of music.
It includes lots of music. It includes our animals.
Our birds.
All dogs go to heaven. Yeah, our birds, our lions. It includes the Lamb who was slain. And here's one of the things that we're gonna see, and I'll stop right after this, is that this becomes a thing. Okay, is right now we have at the beginning of this image we have the throne, and seated upon it is the tree, the gem tree. And then the Lamb is in between the beasts and the throne. But at some point, the Lamb is going to sit on the throne. And that has meaning. That's theological meaning. that we take for granted because we're Christians living 2,000 years later. But for John, living in the first century, undergoing persecution for his witness to Jesus as the author of creation, that's a big idea. Okay? It's a big idea.
And ones who felt that his dog wasn't going to heaven, who he wouldn't believe in heaven.
I don't disagree. But that's a great conversation. All right, folks. 7 next week. Yeah, we'll leave it at that.